Lost in the fog of a cosmic storm, floating on whimsical wavelengths is the norm. Dancing through the stars, chasing spectrums of light, riding the waves that are just out of sight.
Welcome back to Whimsical Wavelengths, where we put the space in Space Race. Really? No. But I am your host, Dr. Jeffrey Zurich. And today we're going to be talking about NASA, the organization synonymous with cutting-edge technology and monumental space missions. But superstitions? Or at the very least, traditions? And oh yes, of course, NASA is full of humans. Humans are inherently wonderful and weird, like listening to podcasts who whimsically prattle on about esoteric topics. Among these traditions, the one Lucky Peanuts stands out. Peanuts? Given today's sensibilities about peanut allergies, this may be surprising, but the backstory starts in the 1960s with the Ranger missions during the race to the moon. Now that I have piqued your interest, and don't let the hidden puns drive you nutty, the Ranger missions were uncrewed missions that were developed to take high-resolution photos of the moon. The plans were first drawn up in 1959, and the first mission was attempted in 1961. By using the word attempted, it didn't go well. I'll get to the peanuts again, I promise. In fact, we have a guest who can talk about this, and we'll get into some hard science, too, about extraterrestrial life with Dr. Morgan Cable from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. But first, let's set the stage. I'll start the background on August 2nd, 1955, the beginning of the space race between the Soviet Union and the United States of America. Really an extension of the nuclear arms race, but it's a good starting point. The USSR was the quickest off the mark, launching the first satellite, Sputnik 1. The United States was playing catch-up. And it could be argued it didn't really get going until the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or NASA, was created and was put into place on October 1st, 1958. What began as putting satellites into space turned into trying to put a man on the moon by 1961 and was immortalized on September 12th, 1962, with this famous speech.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
More than pride. And cashews was on the line. The fate of the free world was at stake. Well, that's an exaggeration. But it is not an exaggeration to say NASA had significant pressure to get some wins. Enter the Ranger missions, with the end goal of taking photos of the moon to support future manned missions. Ranger 1, August 23rd, 1961, designed to enter orbit with scientific instruments and test flight systems. It failed. A rocket malfunction caused the craft to not reach its designated orbit, and it burned up in the atmosphere upon re-entry a week later. Ranger 2, November 18th, 1961. Similar to Ranger 1, it was supposed to make it to orbit. However, again, a rocket malfunction caused it to not reach the planned orbit, and it burned up into the atmosphere upon re-entry. Ranger 3, January 26, 1962. This was NASA's first attempt to land a spacecraft on the moon. It was supposed to take photos during the descent to the lunar surface and deploy instruments after a hard landing. A series of failures plagued Ranger 3, most notably its guidance system, as it was going too fast when it approached the moon and flew right past it. Ranger 4, April 23, 1962. It became the first American craft to, quote, land on anything other than Earth. However, a failure on the craft's computer system caused the solar panel and navigation systems to not be fully functionable. Ranger 5, October 18, 1962. This mission was designed to photograph the moon and land. However, there was a battery issue. It died just 8 hours into the mission, leaving Ranger 5 floating in space as it missed the moon. It still orbits the sun today, with a period similar to of Earth. Ranger 6, February 2nd, 1964. This one was planned to crash on the moon with only an imaging system. to take pictures of the moon during the descent. Unfortunately, the camera system had a short circuit 3 days before reaching the moon, so no images were returned. It was a time of high-stakes space exploration, with NASA preparing for Ranger 7. The USSR was clearly in the lead in the space race. Ranger 7 was tasked with capturing the first close-up images of the moon's surface. However, the stakes were incredibly high because all 6 of the previous Ranger missions had failed in some shape or form. Leading up to the mission, Dick Wallace, a NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory engineer, handed out peanuts to his colleagues in the control room. He thought it might lighten the mood and help ease the tension. And so, the legend was born. Okay, there's the background. Now, let's introduce our guest who's joined us to spread some nutty wisdom. Dr. Morgan Cable, a research scientist at NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California. The science lead on Exobiology Extant Life Surveyor concept and co-deputy PI of the Planetary Instrument for X-ray Lithochemistry, instrument aboard Mars 2020, the Perseverance rover, also a part of the Cassini, Dragonfly, and Europa Clipper missions in various ways. And no, I did not do that in one breath, but thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Sweet. You're although this may come out in a different order than what I record in, this is my first interview for those listening along, and yeah, this is going to be fun. But before jumping into the mythology of lucky peanuts and superstitions at one of the world's eminent scientific institutions, let's get into some science first. Dr. Morgan, how would you describe your research to non-experts?
I think the best way to describe it is that I am on the hunt for evidence of life and interesting chemistry across our solar system, our cosmic backyard. That means designing instruments, doing laboratory experiments, sometimes field work, and getting involved in some of our missions that NASA is sending out to explore the solar system.
Awesome. I did do a bit of a deep dive and tried to figure out what your research is. As you know, I study volcanoes and geophysics, so I'm not exactly doing the same stuff, but kind of taking it from a different point of view, you're looking at chemistry that would be kind of outside the bounds of what we understand life to be here on Earth. Is that correct?
In some cases, yes, but we're also finding there are some places in our solar system that have conditions suitable for life as we know it. Certain organisms that are happily subsisting on Earth today, they could find those same kinds of conditions in other places in the solar system. These include some of these moons of Jupiter and Saturn and other worlds that we call ocean worlds because they have liquid water oceans underneath shells of ice. And there are also other places on Mars and other regions that we call special regions. These are places that also seem to have suitable conditions for certain organisms that we call extremophiles that can handle tougher temperature or pressure extremes, say, than your average organism like you or I.
Right. So we're looking for something, and I guess we're expecting the unexpected when we look for life in the cosmos. We have our brains open to all kinds of ideas.
Exactly. From a science perspective, we have a sample size of 1, right? There's only one world that we know is inhabited. And so as scientists, we try not to bias ourselves and think that that's the only kind of life out there. So we try to design experiments and tests to search for life, even if it might be weird and very different from Earth-based life.
Perfect. And your comments about the moons kind of make the perfect segue into kind of the next 2 questions, because also in process of getting ready, I noticed that a preprint paper that I think might be fully published now, or at the very least will be by the time you all hear this, caught my attention. A proposed model for cryogenic activity on Enceladus driven by volatile X solution. First off, congratulations on getting the paper published. That's always a struggle, especially as a grad student. And this study models eruptions of water from the interior of Saturn's moon, Enceladus, and in a similar way, at least to my understanding, to the volcanic eruptions here on Earth through the expansion of gas or volatiles. So this question has 2 parts. First, was my 1-sentence synopsis of the paper broadly correct? Feel free to expand. And furthermore, it get me thinking about my own bias of volcanology. Would it be fair to say that life in general requires some kind of dynamic interior to a planet or moon to support life?
Those are both really great questions. Let's start with the first one. Yes, I think you did a fabulous job of summarizing this paper. This was a collaboration with some of us at JPL, as well as a colleague, Jason Rabinovich, who is at the Stevens Institute of Technology in Hoboken, New Jersey. But he used to work at JPL as well. And he's a fantastic researcher. The idea behind this paper is that we have discovered these incredible, this plume of material at Saturn's moon Enceladus that is erupting basically free sample from its liquid water ocean into space through these 4 giant cracks in the south polar terrain that we call the tiger stripes. And we're still trying to understand exactly how that liquid is getting expressed. There are a few different theories so far that have been reported in the literature that involve, say, active boiling, because if you have liquid water exposed to the vacuum of space, it's going to boil right away. But what we've done in this model is invoked something else that we think could be driving these eruptions, and that's exsolution. Basically, if you have a good analogy would be a bottle of soda that when you shake it up, if you're unfortunate enough to open that right after you've done so, you end up with this spray of soda all over you. And that's because of this forcible eruption that happens as those bubbles go from being dissolved in that liquid into the gas phase. And previously, this hadn't been included in any of these eruption models, and we think that it's an important component that should be considered, mostly because as scientists, we're really interested in studying what's in this plume and then tracing those measurements back to what might be present down in the ocean, whether it's the concentrations of salts or other what we call habitability indicators, to maybe even little bits of microbes or other biosignature molecules. And so we really need to understand if things are changing during that eruption process, if things are getting enriched or depleted, something that we call fractionation in the plume, or if there's chemistry going on or something like that that could cloud our picture of being able to collect material that's in that eruption and trace it back to exactly what's present in the ocean. And so these studies are super important for doing that. Now, you had asked a second question about biases of eruption of your studies of volcanism. Is that correct? And dynamics?
Yeah. So the idea is that, because it's my own bias, that
Of course.
we need some
We all
kind
have
of
them.
we need some kind of heat or some kind of dynamic system to be able to keep life going. So regardless of whether that is, in our case, it's plate tectonics, but in a water world, it could be the tidal forces of Saturn or Jupiter.
Yes, I think we are finding that in order to sustain life, our current best guesses are that you do need some kind of dynamic process to continue to refresh the system, flush out things that have been utilized, sort of waste materials, and bring in new, say, food or metabolic sources for whatever those organisms might like to consume. So it doesn't mean that life couldn't exist in a scenario where things are a little bit more static, but it's possible that perhaps life might have exhausted all of its resources and then kind of gone into a stasis or died out and might be more challenging to detect. And so I think we definitely get excited when we find dynamic places like Enceladus or Neptune's moon Triton or Jupiter's moon Europa that look like they have been resurfaced or had things happen to them in recent geologic time.
Jumping back to what my first question was going to be, it's just a little bit about how science gets done, as I got sidetracked and jumped onto the more important question in my brain. What does it mean to have a preprint paper? That's where all this started.
That is a great question. A preprint paper means that it has gone through the peer review process and it's in sort of the final stages of getting published. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time to sign off sort of copyright agreements and things like that. And so a preprint allows the science community to be able to access that paper before it's officially published by whichever journal it's being published through. This is really great, especially when you may have up and coming science that's super groundbreaking or important for us to make decisions for, say, working on mission concepts, which is something that we do a lot, and we build off of science literature like this paper to help us optimize the instruments we might want to bring or things like that when we're developing missions.
Cool. Because in geology, we don't really do this. Or if we do, it's exactly how you described it. I've seen papers go online before they've even gone the peer review process, and they call them preprint.
Yeah, I'm not as much of a fan of that because I think the review process is really
Yeah.
important in vetting material. But I also understand that some people really like to get their work out, especially if there's, say, students that are getting close to graduating and applying to jobs, and they would like to have that material out there earlier. So, but I really think it is important that the final paper that is publicly released should have gone through that review and revision process.
Yeah, absolutely. So moving on, space exploration and scientific projects are continually being designed and launched by NASA and obviously our European and other international partners. What upcoming project or projects are you most looking forward to in the years to come?
Oh my goodness, there's so many great things coming up. Europa Clipper is a mission to Jupiter's moon Europa that is launching in just a couple of months. Very, very exciting. This is going to try to understand more deeply and thoroughly the habitability of this moon. Europa has a liquid water ocean underneath a crust of ice. It has more liquid water, actually, than all of Earth's oceans combined. It has about double that amount. And it seems to have all of the conditions present for life as we know it. But so far, we have some measurements from Galileo that explored that area in the late 90s and early 2000s, but we really need to be able to better assess the thickness of the ice shell, the content of the ocean, and things like that with this new and exciting mission. So I'm looking forward to that. The Mars sample return missions that are still in work, but it looks like they're hopefully going to move forward. I'm part of the Mars Perseverance rover team, and we have collected some super exciting samples that seem to have evidence of potential biosignatures, rich in organic material, as well as it looks like preserved evidence of chemical energy through reduction processes. We see reduced and oxidized species right next to each other in these patterns that seem to indicate that they could be consistent with a reduction of that organic material. And in some rocks here on Earth, we see that, and it's due to microbial life, but there are also abiotic explanations for that as well. Abiotic meaning non-life based. So we really need to bring those samples back and understand them, study them with all of the powerful instruments we have here on Earth to see if really there was potentially life on Mars a couple billion years ago. So those are two missions or sets of missions that are up and coming. But looking further down, we've got things like eels that are mission concepts, technologies that we're developing that would be ready for potential future missions one day. We're working on robots and instruments that could access these really hard to reach places, like down into the crevasses of Enceladus or Europa, maybe even sticking our face in that ocean itself, going into, say, the lava tube caves of the moon or Mars. There are all sorts of exciting things on the horizon. Oh, shoot, and I completely forgot Dragonfly. Dragonfly is this amazing 8-bladed helicopter. We call it a relocatable lander because it does spend most of its time on the ground. This is going to Saturn's moon Titan, which is another organically rich world that seems to have all the ingredients for life as we know it. And we're going to go and explore that potential prebiotic or maybe even biotic chemistry with this amazing mission that's launching in 2028 and will arrive at Titan in 2034. So a lot of really exciting stuff coming up.
You really have to pre-plan everything.
You do. A lot of these missions, it can take like a couple of decades from conception to reality, and you really just you fall in love with them and the science they're doing, and become really close to the teammates that you're proposing these with, the scientists and engineers. It's so exciting.
Okay, well, now's the pivot, and don't be afraid to
Yes.
spread it on thick. Will there be peanuts on launch day? And if so, is there a specific lucky type? And by the way, to anyone listening, we're not sponsored by any peanut.
That's true. We do love our peanuts. We like to say at JPL that we're not superstitious, but we do believe in tradition. And this incredible story about the lucky peanuts started off with the very first couple of missions that we ever launched at JPL back in the early 1960s. And I think reflecting on that history, celebrating our successes and coming together as a team. That's all part of bringing those lucky peanuts to any mission critical event, whether it's launch or orbit insertion or landing. I plan on having peanuts myself at every single one of those.
So I guess there is a mythology of sorts that built up around the Ranger 7 mission then.
I think it's more of a celebration that we recognize that failure is a part of pushing the boundaries of science and engineering. You don't know if you're on the edge if you aren't doing things that have risk. And early in JPL's history, right at the beginning, before the Apollo astronauts ever landed on the moon, we launched a spacecraft called Ranger that was supposed to go and check out the moon. Basically, we didn't even know if when the astronauts were to jump out of Eagle 1 and start those first steps on the moon, we didn't know if they would sink up to their neck in moon dust. We had no idea. And so that was the point of these spacecraft. And Ranger 1 failed. In fact, I think that one didn't even leave Earth's orbit. So we built and launched Ranger 2, and that also had a different launch vehicle failure. And we went through 6 Ranger spacecrafts before we had our first success, Ranger 7, which performed brilliantly. And so we went back and looked at the differences. We tried to improve each time, learn from our mistakes, but the only real differences between Ranger 6 and Ranger 7 were that we were eating peanuts during the launch of Ranger 7. And so that's where that tradition evolved. And I think it's a really neat way to keep that in mind, to keep those risks and failures close to us, to remember that is such an important part of what we do, that if we're not pushing ourselves and learning, remembering those things that we learned from that didn't work, that's how we are able to advance and dare mighty things, as we like to say.
Well said. This all came back up somewhat recently in the news due to the peanuts being used as a traditional, although only previously used for launches, for the data return of Voyager 1. And I guess it had a similar meaning to the people that were waiting for that return. It's all about the process and looking forward to the new and daring the new greater thing. But
yeah, especially when you're doing something as scary as a flight software update on a spacecraft that has been in space for almost 50 years.
And is outside of the solar system.
Also that. Not like we could send someone by to go and, turn it off and turn it back on again.
Yeah, the most famous way to check and troubleshoot.
Is it plugged in? Yes.
But I suspect Lucky Peanuts isn't the only tradition at NASA. It seems to be the most long-lasting and famous. Are there any others that you're willing to comment on?
Oh, God. I would say each spacecraft has its own quirky personality based on the team behind it. And that can involve, all sorts of different things, from certain colors associated with what team members wear. Some for Cassini, we loved purple. That was a big one. And we had a choir of singers that would come and come up with some unique songs that we would have at each of our science team meetings, to things like flight software engineers leaving Easter eggs in their code. I mean, there are all sorts of neat ways that we celebrate and make that particular mission have that echo of the people who worked on it, right? Because these may be robots, but they are part of our family. That's how we see them. A lot of times we'll personify them, right? Cassini was a she, absolutely, and I miss her because she worked perfectly up until the day that we pointed her into Saturn, and she tumbled and most likely disintegrated essentially in that atmosphere. But we were able to get data the entire time. I mean, until we lost signal. So you definitely fall in love with these spacecraft, and you like to leave. It leaves an imprint on you, and you leave a bit of an imprint on it in the way that you operate and run that mission.
I wasn't expecting that answer at all. But I guess where I want to quickly go before we get into something more fun and maybe still about philosophy, from an outside person in the public, they may see these billions of dollars being spent on some of these things. Does that ever get to the stress of the crew, or is it these other aspects of the tradition routines that you do kind of crowd out everything else because you can just focus on the project itself?
I think we're always very cognizant and aware of the fact that, we're supported by taxpayer dollars, that our successes are critical for improving human knowledge, and that we do that because of everyone being able to contribute to this, and the science belongs to everyone. And so we certainly do feel that pressure, especially when we're in these mission critical events. And I think that's why we mark them with things like the peanuts, to sort of denote that this is a really important time, and this is our opportunity to shine. These missions do carry, an expense. I will point out, though, that the entirety of NASA's budget used to be 0.5%. Now, in recent years, now we're 0.3% of the entire budget. So while $1 billion does sound like a lot to invest in a mission, relative to a lot of other government spending, we're just a drop in the bucket, and we do a lot with that. But boy, if you could write your congressman and ask them to increase NASA's budget just a little bit more. I mean, back when we were launching Apollo astronauts, I think our budget was something like 10 times more than it is now. And I do think that investing in science and technology development helps us all. I mean, we have just everything from dialysis machines to the camera in your cell phone. Those were designed by NASA. In particular, the camera was by JPL. And those are technologies that we give away for free. We don't make any money off of those, and all of society benefits. So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Absolutely, because you never know where the next big life-changing discovery is going to come from, and almost always it comes from the public purse. Doesn't matter the country you're in. It's just
Yeah,
the
I think
nature of how this works.
Yeah, investing in NASA is investing in our future. There's so many people like me who, wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid. This is what inspired me to go into science. And I think, having those big dreams, the opportunity to be able to participate in what we call civilization level science, questions like, are we alone? Things that we'll only get to make that discovery once in human history. Those are just really amazing to be able to be part of the teams that ask those questions. And so I think hopefully that's something that we as humans will always continue to look up at the stars and wonder, and be able to support things like NASA missions to be able to try to answer those questions that we're wondering about.
All right, so I'm going to switch gears a little bit here. It's going to be a little more ad hoc, and just you'll see.
Okay. I think I'm ready.
Now, in part because of the personnel involved, not all parts of space exploration is done by big, large science teams. Some are test pilots that went up to the moon that didn't have a science background, and absolutely everywhere in between. So I've got a list of some of the more wacky ones that seem to take place for those people that are going up to the International Space Station from Russia. So I want to be clear, this isn't NASA directly, but there will be NASA astronauts that likely have partaked in some of these more strange and wacky ones. And feel free to just fill in with anything that you want to comment on, or some of these
Sure.
are pretty strange. So the first one, cheerleaders. So yeah, there's at least, I don't know how often, because I haven't been able to talk to a Russian cosmonaut, but as they go down the gangway towards their spaceship to get in and go up to the International Space Station, it's tradition that a welcome greets the astronauts and cosmonauts with golden pom-poms, a whole bunch of women in fur coats and stuff if it's the middle of winter.
Wow, that's super exciting. I've never had a team cheer for me for anything. I feel like that would be a fun experience.
Yeah, I'm wondering if it's part of kind of the whole celebration of those people would have been a real big thing back in the Cold War. So, because they were heroes,
Absolutely.
right? So I wonder if that's kind of more of a carry on from that.
Yeah.
It sounds like they purposely try to disorient the astronauts and the cosmonauts by like spinning them around on swivel chairs and stuff as a way to help them not vomit on the trip up. That sounds
I guess
very
getting
weird.
them ready.
Apparently, there's some debate in the community whether or not it's effective, but they still do it as part of tradition.
Interesting.
There is a movie that they all need to watch of a cult 1970 film. The White Sun of the Desert is a Russian twist on an American Western. It's a Russian classic, apparently, and I've never heard of it. But however, every astronaut that has flown from Baikonur, I might replace that with a voice later, since the early 1970s has ritually watched this film before launch. And I don't know if they actually make the international people watch it, but that's interesting. It's also blessed by a priest before exploding off into the great unknown. I guess there's cuddly toys on the ISS.
Really?
Yeah, so the idea is that you have them on a string somewhere nearby the instruments, so that way when it starts to feel the weightlessness, you can unbuckle and you know you're in 0G.
Oh, yes, I have seen this. Yes, I think that's awesome.
I think it's great, and they're super cute. I can't think of a better way to do that. The most bizarre one to me is about, apparently, although we don't know for sure, the first Russian into space, Gargan.
Yeah,
had to
Yuri
rel-
Gagarin.
Yes, he had to relieve himself just before going, and so he peed on the back tire of the bus that brought him there. And so now it's a
I have heard
tradition
this.
that every male astronaut unzips and then pees on the back tire of the bus, and then they need a crew to piece the whole spacesuit back together because they're a lot more complicated than they once were. And even female astronauts like bring vials of their own urine to throw on the bus tire. Like, I think that is just amazing and strange.
That is very interesting, but who am I to argue with tradition?
I know. I just think it's so great and so hilarious that no matter who we are, we all create these traditions. It's just,
Yeah.
and my
I actually
favorite.
thought of a couple more, but once you're done.
Sure. My favorite that's in this list is a towel because of the late Douglas Adams.
Yes, you always have to bring a towel.
That's
It's
right.
very important.
There's even a towel day on May 25th.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh,
apparently.
fantastic.
I've never celebrated it, but I might this year.
Okay.
Or
And
next
that's
year.
right after May the 4th be with you, which is, of course, another fun sci-fi day for Star Wars fans.
Absolutely. Maybe I'll do a special episode on that.
Yeah.
The physics of Star Wars, or the lack thereof.
There are some things that are done well and some things that I think creative license was taken, but it's always fun to compare the science of science fiction to reality and use that as inspiration for what we might invent next.
Absolutely.
Like, I would love to have a tricorder. Oh my gosh, that would be amazing, from Star Trek.
Yeah, for
But
sure.
I digress.
You said you had a couple more.
Yeah, there are a couple of other just fun quirks and things that we do in some of our missions that I'd like to share. For the Europa Clipper mission, this is the one that's launching later this year to Jupiter's moon Europa. Our project scientist is a big fan of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and so ever since the first science team meeting, we have had a monolith that is constructed for each meeting, and we usually leave that with a particular, if it's held at a particular institution, we'll leave it there or as an art installation nearby. And we have a very large bone similar to what was first picked up in the movie that we use as a totem to pass along for leadership in certain groups that we have to lead various science themes and working groups and stuff. So we have a lot of fun blending science fiction with science fact in that. And then for the Mars missions, I don't know if you heard about the tires of Curiosity. Did you ever hear this story?
If I have, I've forgotten it.
This is a fun story. Okay, so all of these missions are NASA missions, but the ones that are built by JPL, our Jet Propulsion Lab, we take particular pride in. And so this was for the launch of the Curiosity rover. This was the first very large rover that we sent to Mars after the two smaller Spirit and Opportunity, and then the itty bitty but adorable and still powerful Sojourner before that. So for Curiosity, it has these 6 metal tires. And we needed to put a couple of strategically placed holes in these tires for 2 reasons. First reason is if we got rocks or things that sort of came in there because they're sort of open on the inside, we didn't want those to accumulate and sort of start to affect our ability to drive. And every time that these tires rotate, the pattern of the holes is left behind on the surface of Mars. And so you can use that for what's called visual odometry. Basically, you can map each rotation and figure out how far you've driven. And so we put some holes in there. And it was only until right before launch that someone realized that that was actually Morse code for JPL. And so we managed to sneak that one by. And so every time Curiosity drives around on Mars, it's putting JPL into its tracks, which is it's kind of a fun way to celebrate all the tremendous work the engineers did in building that mission. Now, for this latest Mars rover, Perseverance, we couldn't quite get away with something that brazen, and so instead, we did something else. So the parachute that we used to land that rover safely was two-colored. It was orange and white, which are the colors of Caltech, who administers JPL, but also the patterns of the panels in the parachute, they actually spelled out in Morse code, "Dare Mighty Things," which is our mantra at JPL. And it also included the GPS coordinates of where JPL is located. And you can actually buy, I think, copies of that as a skirt now for anyone who's interested in wearing something like that. I definitely have one myself. So we do find ways to leave our marks on our missions that we're so proud of. And I look forward to seeing what we do with Dragonfly. I don't know. APL, the Applied Physics Lab at Johns Hopkins University, is running that one, but they also have some really brilliant engineers. So we'll see what they can come up with, how creative they can be.
Awesome. And if you want to give me those links to
I will
or other
happily
thing,
do so.
I'll put them in the show notes for anyone who's listening along.
Awesome.
And we've come down to the last question. Before we wrap, it is the most important and the nuttiest. What is your favorite science joke?
Okay, it's a bit of a long one. Are you ready?
It's okay. Let's go.
Okay, I'm a chemist, so this is a chemistry joke, so apologies to anyone
Because
who's
you're only
listening.
funny periodically?
Oh, no, it's better than that, but
Okay.
that's a good one. So there's an analytical chemist, a physical chemist, and a biochemist, and they're all in lab together, and one of them does something and a fire breaks out. So the biochemist says, we need water. We need to saturate the material. That'll put the fire out. The physical chemist says, no. We need to lower the temperature of the room below the heat of combustion of the substance, and that'll put the fire out. So meanwhile, while those two are arguing, the analytical chemist is running around starting more fires. And the other two stop, they look at her, and they're like, what are you doing? And she says, I can't make this important of a decision based on this small a sample size. That is my very best joke.
Science joke. Let's
Yes, science. Yeah. Well, but are there others? No.
Perfect. Okay, well, that brings it all to a wrap. And thank you so much for agreeing to do this and being my first interviewee.
Your first victim. No, this was wonderful. Jeff, thank you so much. I love the work that you put into this and delving into the history of our missions and our passion for what we do. This was really a joy. So thanks so much.
Awesome.
If you've enjoyed the episode, subscribe. And if you have subscribed already, thank you. Tell a friend. Look in the show notes for a Patreon account where you can help keep this podcast running, as well as a Discord server for those Patreons who just want to ask me more random questions. And if I don't know the answer, I'll do my best to find the answer, or perhaps find someone who could do it as part of an episode in the future. Thank you so much.
Lost in the fog of a cosmic storm, floating on whimsical wavelengths is the norm. Dancing through the stars, chasing spectrums of light, riding the waves that are just out of sight. In a world so chaotic that misbehaves, melodies that echo show us sex always. Colors intertwine, painting the sky. We're lost in the rhythm as the universe flies by. Oh, we're tuned in, feeling the beat of the unknown. Can you hear it? It's echoing through your bones. In this melodic maze we